بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله حمد الشاكرين. الحمد لله في البدايات والحمد لله في النهايات. الحمد لله دائما وأبدا. الحمد لله على كل حال، ونعوذ بالله من حال أهل النار. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك وأنعم وأكرم على سيد الخلق حبيبنا وشفيعنا وقرة أعيننا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه في الأولين، وصل وسلم وبارك اللهم على نبينا محمد في الآخرين، وصل وسلم وبارك اللهم على نبينا محمد في الملأ الأعلى إلى يوم الدين. We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and thanking Him. My dear brothers and sisters, look around you at this moment. Ya Allah, we thank you for this moment. We thank you, O Allah, for the brothers and the sisters to the right of us and to the left of us. Ya Allah, we thank you for guiding us to leave our homes in pursuit of your remembrance. Ya Allah, we thank you for the blinking of our eyes, the beating of our hearts, the moving of our hands and legs. Ya Allah, we thank you for every letter of Quran we read, even if our recitation is broken. Ya Allah, we thank you for every act of charity that we give, even if it is nothing but a single dollar. Ya Allah, we thank you for every salah that we make, even if it has barely any khushur. Ya Allah, we thank you for every blessing of the past, even if we have forgotten it. Ya Allah, we thank you for the blessings of the present, even if we are unaware of them. And we thank you, O Allah, for the blessings of the future, those blessings that have yet to come. But because, O Allah, because you are Allah, we thank you for those blessings, because you've never stopped blessing us. But beyond anything else, join me, dear brothers and sisters, in thanking Allah for the greatest blessing in my life and yours, the gift of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Ya Allah, who would we be without La ilaha illallah? Ya Allah, where would we be without Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam? We thank you, O Allah, for gifting us with the gift of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And we ask of you, O Allah, through your most blessed of names, that you allow us to live and die upon this kalima, this belief of La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Dear brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This morning I was sitting in the airport and I was contemplating the trip to Canada. I had a lot of ideas of what my first trip to this part of Canada would look like. And I was sitting there randomly in the airport with too large of a size Diet Coke and a snack I shouldn't have been having at 7 a.m. And I was laughing to myself. I said, this is so much better than whatever I had planned. This is the plan of Allah. Allah planned for my first time stepping here to be gathered with you all in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of the scholars, he says, if you wonder where you are with Allah, you ever lay there at night, maybe early in the morning, crusty-eyed, and you're like, I wonder what Allah thinks of me. Or you're laying at night, تتقلب في هموم الدنيا, you're turning left and right with the worries of this world, and you just wonder, I wonder where I am with Allah. I wonder what Allah thinks of me. One of the scholars, he says, there's a way to answer that question and that moment. فَانظُرْ أَيْنَ أَقَامَكَ. Look at where Allah Ta'ala has placed you. Look at you right now. Look at where Allah has brought you. You see, to many of us, these gatherings, they become anticipated, they become expected. They're a result of problematic parking situations, trying to navigate overly large convention centers and masajid, and dealing with making sure that we bring enough snacks with us. And they just seem like everyday life. But you see, my dear sister and my dear brother, this moment in the eyes of Allah is never normal. This moment in the eyes of Allah is never trivial. This moment that you are experiencing right now is the greatest of gatherings in the eyes of Allah Jalla Jalaluh. A gathering of His remembrance. And if you ever doubt Allah's love for you, if you ever doubt your worth in this dunya, if you ever doubt your position, then look at where Allah Ta'ala has placed you, in His remembrance. And we ask Allah Ta'ala to invite us again and again to be in His remembrance. And yet as we are on these journeys, it becomes necessary for us to visit the journeys of those before us. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala gave us glimpses into the lives of the greatest of generations and the greatest of human beings ever to walk this earth. And for every moment in our life, there is a moment from the lives of the greatest of generations that we can parallel ourselves to. And I'll tell you in full transparency, the older I get, the more I realize that while our greatest role model to life is Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, it fully makes sense that the person that Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam chose to be his role model was none other than Ibrahim alayhi salam. How wild is that? That the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, our role model, the one who وَمَا يَنْطِقُ عَنِ الْهَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ, our Prophet, my beloved and your beloved, my teacher and your teacher, everything about him is wahi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, that he too had a role model. Letting us know that none of us can live this life without being followers of someone. And if you are going to follow, as one of the Salaf he said, if you're going to follow someone, then you might as well choose the one you are following. And who better to choose as your role model than Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. One of the scholars, he actually describes it incredibly beautiful. He says every single day that the believer rises out of bed, it's as if they have a portrait of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. By knowing him, by knowing his character, by knowing his statements, by knowing his story, every single day you look at the imagery of this beautiful and most blessed of creation, and you say, how can I be more like him? How can I talk more like him? How can I pray more like him? How can I love more like him? How can I smile more like him? And that, dear brothers and sisters, is how we earn a place with him in Jannah. But even he, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, had a role model, and that was Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, time will not allow for us to even touch a drop from the ocean of hikam, of wisdoms that we can learn from him. But the fundamental lesson that I've come to realize from the life of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam is probably one of the most difficult things that we can learn in this world, is that life is never going to be perfect. Life is not always, and more often than not, will not go our way. That life is complicated. Life will have its ups and downs. People will disappoint, others will abandon. And yet Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam became what Allah described as an ummah, a one-man nation. Like he traveled through the ups and downs and the highs and lows of life, and instead of it breaking him, it made him who he was. Life can break you, but every opportunity in life that can break you can also make you. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam was a young boy, chota bache, just sitting with his father when Iman had already entered his heart. And he had the courage and the bravery to have a very necessary conversation with his father. And so many of our homes are in need of conversations. So many of our homes are in need of conversations about Allah. So many of our dining tables are missing the opportunity to talk about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam over some really well done mutton biryani. So many of our houses are missing the reading, a daily reading of ahadith from Riyadus Salihin. So many of our houses have become like maqabir, have become like a qabristan. They've become like graveyards. a place that lacked the remembrance of Allah, a place that lacks prayer. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam was sitting in his home with a father who not only disbelieved in Allah, but a father that was leading the effort to worship other than Allah. And the imagery of this in Surah Maryam, I invite myself first and foremost and you all to travel through the Quran with me, spend some time with Surah Maryam, devote some time with the stories of our prophets. Again, these are not just stories that tell us about people. Dear brothers and sisters, I swear to you by Allah, in the nights of Allah, these are stories that tell us about ourselves. They tell us as much about ourselves as they do about those before us. And Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, as a young boy, he talks to his father. He says, Ya abati, oh my father. One of our scholars of tafsir, he comments on this. He says, the lessons from Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam could have stopped at just Ya abati. Ya abati in the Arabic language is the epitome, the peak of how you can speak to your father with adab, with good manners. He says, oh my father, oh my dearest of fathers. لِمَ تَعْبُدُ? Why do you worship? يَا أَبَتِ لَا تَعْبُدِ الشَّيْطَانِ. Oh my father, do not worship shaitan. مَا لَا يَسْمَعُ وَلَا يُبْصِرُ. Why do you worship that which does not hear you and does not see you and does not benefit you in any capacity? يَا أَبَتِ, oh my father, إِنِّي قَدْ جَاءَنِي مِنَ الْعِلْمِ مَا لَمْ يَأْتِكَ. Oh my father, I got some knowledge that has not reached you yet. فَاتَّبِعْنِي. Oh my father, follow me and let us be guided together. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam showed us the epitome of adab, manners with our fathers and mothers. And Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam was responded to with exactly what we talked about. Sometimes even when we do everything right, life goes wrong. Sometimes even when we check off all the boxes, things don't go the way that we want. His father threatened him. His father exiled him. And even then, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam continued to be a master of good manners. This is just the start of his journey. And Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam is already teaching us that no matter what the world around you looks like, remain who you are with Allah Jalla Jalaluh. Remain who you are with Allah. And that is even just in the beginning of his journey, but we see this as a trend that Allah Ta'ala takes Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam through so many highs and lows. But he did not just start out as a person who believed in Allah. He did something that so many of us shy away from doing. You know what that is? My dear brothers and sisters, he chose to befriend Allah. As'alukum billah. I ask you by Allah. Wallahi, I speak to you from my heart to your heart. Have you chosen to befriend Allah? I'm not asking you about your mom. I'm not asking you if your dad is friends with Allah. I'm not telling you if that one auntie that taught you Surah Al-Asr is friends with Allah. I'm asking you, my brother and my sister, have you chosen and have I chosen to befriend Allah? What made Sayyidina Ibrahim Khalilullah is that he actively chose to befriend Allah. But not just to befriend Allah, but to allow Allah to become his closest of companions. And Allah does what he does. When you walk to Allah, he runs to you. When you go to Allah, he goes to you faster and gives you more than you can ever imagine. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, the more that he drew nearer to the world, to Allah, the more the world pulled him back. And this is the sunnah of Allah on this earth. And yet something very miraculous happens when all of the people around him abandon and leave Ibrahim. When all of them turn against Sayyidina Ibrahim. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam finds himself where so many of us find ourselves, between a rock and a hard place. How many of us have found ourselves in that position, not knowing which way to turn? Allahumma la malja'a wa la manja'a minka illa ilayk. Oh Allah, there's no running away from you except to you. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam is about to be catapulted into a fire. Why? My dear brothers and sisters, because he believes what you and I believe. He believed in La ilaha illallah. And as he's being catapulted into the fire, the narration comes to us by Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. The angel Jibreel alayhi salam comes to him while he is mid-air about to go into the fire. And he says, would you like help right now? And Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, he responds in the most unapologetically strong conviction type of ways. He says, "O Ibrahim, if it is you who will help me, then no. But if it is Allah, then I am always in need of the help of Allah. Hasbi Allahu wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is enough for me. And who better to trust in than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?" When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala places us between a rock and a hard place, it's because Allah wants us to realize that there is no light out of our darkness except the light of Allah. And that, dear brothers and sisters, is why Al-Imam Ibn Al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala wa radiya an, he says very beautifully, he says, imagine a man in the middle of the ocean, in the middle of the night, in the middle of a storm, clinging on to a piece of wood for dear life, saying, Ya Allah, Ya Allah. He says, imagine that man. If you think that that person needs Allah more than you, then you don't know Allah and you don't know the reality of yourself. We are all in need of Allah. And Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, he chose to befriend Allah, showing us the only way that we can rise through the ruins of our life is by choosing to be the friends of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it didn't stop there. Allah Ta'ala, when you befriend Him, when you turn to Him, when you lean on Him, the impossible becomes possible. And a fire, the nature of it, the purpose of it, the distinguishing characteristic of a fire is to burn, but nothing is impossible for Allah. The creator of all those systems can flip them on their back. And the same fire that burned became cool for Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, because impossible is nothing for Allah Jalla Jalaluh. And that's what happens when you befriend Allah. But that journey did not stop there, because as Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam was rising in his ranks with Allah, so did the obstacles and the challenges in his path. I think about the moment of Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam being commanded by Allah Jalla Jalaluh to leave Sayyida Hajar and baby Ismail in the middle of the desert. Imagine this moment with me. Imagine Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam, years and decades making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant him offspring. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through all of His beautiful names and attributes that He give beautiful and healthy and righteous offspring to all those who wish to have them. Say Ameen. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam is finally granted this child. And Allah ta'ala says, now that you have this child, leave him in the barren desert with his mother. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam shows us that these moments of faith, having faith in Allah, does not make difficult moments less than difficult. It's not that you lose the feeling of the sadness or the worry, but it's that you know the only one that can help you through that sadness and worry. See, having a connection with Allah does not dismiss your humanity. Having a connection with Allah amplifies and refines your humanity. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam was commanded to leave them in the barren desert. He turns around and starts walking away. Sayyida Hajar alayhi salam, she starts calling upon him. My dear brothers and sisters, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam was struggling with this moment, the moments that we abandon things for the sake of Allah. So many of us have so many different things to abandon for Allah. habits and substances and relationships and business transactions and opportunities that we walked away from for the sake of Allah. Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam knows what it's like to let go of things for Allah. He let go of the most beloved of people to him. He couldn't even look back. He couldn't even look back. Until Hajar alayhi salam, she calls on, she says, Allahu amaraka bihada. Oh Ibrahim, are you leaving us here all alone in the barren desert because this is what Allah commanded of you? He still didn't look back. He couldn't gaze his eyes upon them one more time. He just nodded his head, confirming that. She responded, growing up, having witnessed firsthand from Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam the result of being the friend of Allah. She says, إِذَنْ لَنْ يُضَيِّعَنَ Allah. If who you've left us with is Allah, then Allah will never forsake us. Allah will never abandon us. She learned the lesson from Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam. She knew that the one who knows Allah, she knew that the one who befriends Allah, that they are never really alone. That they have Allah through every step that they take. And it doesn't mean that we have all the answers. It doesn't mean that we know what the end of the story is going to look like. But my dear brothers and sisters, since when are we the authors of our stories? Since when are we the ones that wrote our past and our present? It's always been that the author of my story and your story is Allah Jalla Jalaluh. Who better to write our stories than Allah? Who better to write the future chapters than Allah? Who better to facilitate and choose for us than Allah? Sayyidah Hajar alayhi salam, she gives us the epitome of this faith that she learned from Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salam when her baby begins to cry. And those of you who have young children, you know how painful that cry can be. And moms are incredible. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless our mothers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect our mothers. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow them to be the queens of Jannah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant our mothers the moment of drinking from the hands of Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Mothers can distinguish between the cry of complaining, to the crying for no reason, to the crying because you're in pain, to the crying because you need to be fed, to the crying because your diaper hasn't been changed in too long. Mothers know the difference between those cries. And she heard her child cry. And she knew that her child, baby Ibrahim, was hungry. And she began to run between the mountains. One of the scholars of tafsir, he comments on this and he says, generally what we can assume is her running between the mountains was, it's not because she was anticipating Angel Jibreel. Never in her wildest imaginations did she think that because she, as a mother with a baby in the middle of a desert, that because she needed to feed her child, that Allah would send down an angel. Her hypothesis was that maybe what Allah would send is a caravan that happens to be passing by. They'd have some water. She'd take a few sips and they would drink. But she continued to run, just like we run back and forth in our life, from difficulty to ease, from richness to poverty, from married to divorced to single to back to married. We run back and forth. But Sayyidina Hajar, she continued to run back and forth, not knowing where Allah was going to take her. But what she knew fundamentally, she was running between the same mountain 7 times. Clearly, she wasn't trying to go to any specific place, but it was very clear that even though she didn't know where she was going to go, she knew who it was that was going to take care of her. And that was and forever will be Allah. And not only did Allah take care of her, but Allah took care of her in a way that He takes care of you and I today. Allah sent down the angel Jibreel. He struck the earth and Zamzam water gushed. Because even when we don't know what Allah is going to do for us, Allah never stops doing what He does. When you befriend Allah, you witness the miracles of Allah every day. When you befriend Allah, you witness the miracles of Allah in every moment of your life. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to be from the friends of Allah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who remember Him by night and by day. We beg of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make the Quran our companion. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us the suhbah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to invite us to gatherings like this again and again. هذا والله أعلم وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وجزاكم الله عنا خيرا.